Sheldon's now retired. He was the co-founder of Finnegan Pinchuk Productions and was the Emmy-nominated executive producer of countless miniseries and television series, including the one-hour programs Any Day Now, Northern Exposure, and Nash Bridges, many others as well. He was the supervising producer on the feature film Reality Bites with Ben Stiller, directed by Ben Stiller, I believe. Ethan Hawke and Winona Ryder were in that as well. Great film. So, welcome. To Sheldon's right. No, left. Okay, the other left. To Sheldon's left is Julie McNamara, who is Barbara's and Sheldon's daughter. She is the Senior Vice President of Drama Development for CBS Television Studios. And as such, she has overseen the development of a number of shows, just a few among them to be listed here. Hawaii Five-0, the reboot. Blue Bloods, The Good Wife, NCIS Los Angeles, and 90210. Not all air on CBS, so perhaps at some point we can talk about what that means and how that works. And to Julie's left is her husband, John McNamara, who is a television executive producer. And we'll learn what that means shortly. He's been the executive producer of such shows as Prime Suspect, In Plain Sight, and The Fugitive. He also was the creator and executive producer of the Fox show Prophet. So, welcome, John. All right. To begin, I'd like to ask each of you, and ideally one at a time, so we can start over here. Tell us what your title means, what your job entails or entailed. In other words, what do you do or what did you do? So, Sheldon, let's start with you. Executive producer, head of a company. What did you do? What was that all about?
For simplification purposes, I usually suggest to people that an executive producer is like a general contractor. You want to build a house, someone's got to design the house. You need an architect. You need a builder, a foreman. You need an electrician. You need a plumber. You need all the people that have put the thing together and come up with a finished product to hopefully someone's overall specifications. And that's what an executive producer does, although there are considerable variations, project to project, on what the executive producer or anybody else in the production field will do on a given project based on personalities and based on trust issues and based on who's got a better track record and so forth and so on. But as I said, the producer function, whether you call it an executive producer or a producer, but not including a line producer, is to put together the department heads, to bring to the project those people that will see it to fruition in the best possible way, at least in your opinion, the best possible way. So that would include first the director. Well, first chronologically is the writer, because you have to come up with a premise and then you hand that over to the writer, and the writer comes up with a treatment, and if the treatment works, with a first draft of the script and subsequent drafts. And at some point you need the filmmaker, which would be the director. Now, there you have a slight dichotomy between feature films and television. It's often said that feature films are a director's medium, and television is a writer's medium. The obvious reason for that is that if you're talking about series television, you need to have somebody with the overall vision of what the series is going to be, not only in terms of the episode you're shooting, but the episode you're preparing, the episode you're in post-production on, the episode that's going to come 5 years down the road. Sometimes it appears as though that vision gets lost, as in Lost. But the creator of the show, normally, if he's got the track record, is the one that the ultimate buyer, meaning the network usually, relies upon to deliver the product that they ordered from.
Okay. And I want to come back later to the distinction between producer, as you just described it, and line producer. But Julie, what do you do?
What do I do? I have the pleasure of shepherding all of the one-hour dramas for CBS Studio that eventually go on prime time at any network. We are a vertically integrated company, which means that CBS Network is owned by the same person as our studio, by the same entity. It's part of the same company. So our primary buyer is CBS Network, but we also sell to the CW, which is partly owned by the same corporation, and we also sell in cable. So my job is to start from the point of reading writing samples to know who I may want to be in business with, who I may want to hear an idea from. Have those people sit on my couch and pitch me the kernel of a story and a group of characters that they want to see go for 200 episodes. And take that through to deciding which ones, yes, we want to go with this one, we love it, here are our notes, here are our thoughts, let's get it out to the network. Hopefully we sell it to the network. Then my job becomes shepherding still, getting outlines in and giving notes on outlines and getting the material in shape to go to the network. Same thing then on scripts, giving a lot of feedback on material. And then now where we are in the season, because my job is very cyclical, it sort of follows the television season. Now my job is, we've had 8 pilots picked up by those networks for getting shot as a pilot. And so for those 8 dramas, we are casting. I'm helping, I help to find the directors for the projects, cast them, who's going to be the costume designer, who's going to be the DP, where is it going to shoot, how do we stay on budget, how much should we spend on this one versus this one, and why, and where are we putting our resources as a studio based on our belief in certain projects creatively. And then at the point where hopefully some of those pilots are picked up to series, I stay on the series for about 6 to 8 episodes as I'm transitioning with other executives in the current division, who then take the series from there so that my department returns to hearing new ideas. So in May, we have this big upfront announcement in New York City where the networks talk about their new shows, and hopefully a lot of them are ours. That's what we want to have happen. Then I take a really nice 2-week vacation, and then it starts all over again, and I start hearing new ideas. So it's a great job, and it's a pleasure to do it, and that's basically what I do.
Now, it sounded at some point when you talked about once a show is going to move forward in pre-production, and you're talking about finding the DP and everything, it sounds like there's a little crossover between what you do on the studio side and what a producer does.
We are, at the studio, we're sort of the liaison between the network buyer and the producers, who on both sides are people who do that job but have done it differently, because John will tell you he's a writer. But we are advocates for the creative team, whatever that may look like, producers, writers, director. We're their advocate. We're also very knowledgeable about what the networks are looking for and what we have, a lot of institutional memory about what has taken place at CBS and CW and in cable, and so we can really help ideally navigate to where the creative team has a very positive experience. Whether their pilot, ultimately gets shot or not, there are a lot of vagaries with that, and you never know going into pitching an idea what the network is going to want 6 months later when they're making those decisions. Right. But at the studio, we can help let you get across your vision while also being mindful of what the buyer is looking for. And we tend to have a good barometer of that. So
Yeah.
that's...
Thank you. Now, John, you too are an executive producer, but Julie's already made a distinction on your behalf between the way you approach the job and the way Sheldon has. So please continue.
Yeah, I'm very impressed. I didn't know you guys did all that stuff. I just sit alone in a room and make shit up. I mean, that's really all we do, honestly. I was a playwright and sort of stumbled into TV because the money in playwriting sucks. It's really bad. And I had an agent at a young age who said, move to California, and I'm like, why? He goes, it's warm, it's better to be poor here, and you're very poor, and you can get into television. I'm like, that sounds good. I watch TV, that's pretty cool. So I came out, and honestly, the way that I became an executive producer was, I kept handing in scripts for stuff that I would, eventually sell, and I was told, okay, thanks a lot, now we're going to have a meeting. I'm like, well, what's the meeting about? Well, you don't need to know that, just, we'll call you. So the next script, I say to the same people, well, can I be in the meeting this time? They're like, yeah, take less money, and you can be in the meeting, we'll call you whatever, a co-producer, a story editor, a staff writer, whatever. And slowly sort of work your way up by, trading whatever you have to trade to have a little more access to the decision-making process, which I think Sheldon and Julie described really well. Because ultimately it's about making decisions that are based on the script in some way or another. So I think one of the reasons in television that TV is a writer's medium, as Sheldon said, is that there's a pace to it, and there's a certain kind of you have to have a vision of the show, but it's just making decisions.
Okay. And you're primarily, though, concerned, or correct me if I'm wrong, with the creative decisions.
Well, I wish.
Okay.
But honestly, as a showrunner, you're responsible for the money as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the analogy of a general contractor is really, really good, because you have warring factions of the plasterer, think of him as the sound guy, and the floor guy, think of him as the camera guy, and they hate each other. The sound guy's like, well, it's good for sound. And the camera guy's, well, not good for camera. And that's affecting everything to do with your day, making your day both creatively and financially. And as a showrunner, you're expected to come in on or under budget, or cuts are made down the line.
Now, it seems like this might be a good opportunity to bring in this person called the line producer.
Yeah.
How does the line producer fit into this, and how is a line producer different from an executive producer or some other supervising producer or something like that?
I defer to
Okay.
a man who's been both. I've only been one.
Dr. Pinchuk?
With the executive producer, we've kind of outlined already. We have a pretty good idea, I think, of what that is. The line producer is the guy who doesn't necessarily need to have much in the way of creative chops, but is able to keep the whole herd of cats in line. Work with the schedule, as John says, keep the budget under control, although he has to defer because very often the line producer doesn't ultimately have the authority it takes to make creative cuts where they're required in order to favorably impact the budget. But it's his job to do the day-to-day job of production, do the production schedule, make sure everybody gets there on time, make sure the wardrobe department's doing what it's supposed to be doing and everything is prepared when it's supposed to be there. Same thing with camera, with sound, with hair and makeup. Just make sure the thing keeps humming. That's essentially the difference.
Let's talk a little bit about the life cycle of a television project, from conception through, ideally, hopefully, to broadcast and maybe even beyond syndication. But let's start from the beginning, including the various personnel who get involved at the various stages. Whoever would like to, why don't we start, since it always begins with the idea. John, as a writer, you've come up with these ideas, so it'll start with you.
Yeah.
Begin this, if you would, please.
You normally would either contact your agent and or a friend that you trust and say, what do you think of this idea? What do you think? Think it's good? Think it's bad? And you sort of begin to shape it in just terms of the smallest possible terms. I always say that like a really good idea for a TV show should fit in the palm of your hand. It should be about 3 or 4 sentences, and from that, if it's the right 3 or 4 sentences, one of my favorite ideas I ever heard, that one of the many you think like, why didn't I think of that, was when I first heard what the concept of ER was. ER had a very, very long gestation period. It was originally written as a movie by Michael Crichton, developed by Steven Spielberg. Never made it, obviously never made it as a movie. And the way they sold it to NBC, and they got an incredibly good, rich deal that helped get the show on the air, was Michael Crichton said to Warren Littlefield, I think, it's an action show with one set. It's absolutely as thrilling as any action show, but you never leave the set. And of course, what you think is like, well, we can make that show every 7 days. But it's going to be really amazingly fast-paced and cover a wide range. That's what I mean by that idea. It's just a terrific idea. 24 is one of those ideas. Just sits right in the palm of your hand, and you're just like, oh, sweet. I never had one of those ideas. I appreciate them when I hear them. And you shape it. When you do anything else creative, whether it's a sculpture, a painting, or a poem, you just start to shape it, refine it, and you want to then try to find the best possible home for it, and that's generally going to be CBS Studios. A little doubt in my mind. That's the best possible place. And the studio, usually you'll go to a studio first with your agent. You'll make a plaintive, begging pitch. Oh, please like me. And then if they like you, you take it to the networks. And as Julie said, we live in a very vertically integrated time in our business, where CBS Studios sells to CBS Network, ABC, NBC, so on and so forth. So generally, if you align yourself with a studio, you're sort of picking your network as well nowadays. There are differences. Cable's different.
And Warner Brothers.
And Warner Brothers,
right.
Yes.
Now you have your beautiful
object
of beauty, and you're going in and you're pitching, and the pitch session could be 20 minutes or an hour, whatever it is.
2 hours with me, but yeah.
They let you go down.
I actually once pitched a 2-hour pilot, and it took 2 hours.
But my
I don't know why they both profit, actually.
you actually acted out all the parts.
I don't know, like, for some reason, the pitch took almost as long as the pilot ended up being. I don't ask me why they
You were very inexperienced.
Did it sell?
And it was me, and it was a profit.
Oh, it did sell. So it did sell. To get me.
Yeah.
But my question is, in addition to the idea and your ability to pitch it, what do you have in writing at this point? Do you have the pilot script written? Do you have a Bible? Do you have a premise, a treatment document of some sort?
Every show's been different.
Mm-hmm.
Julie will attest to this. I tend to over-research, overthink, over-prepare, overwrite. So I usually go and hence the 2-hour pitch. Because I get really excited. I get really involved in the world that I'm in. And I think everyone else is going to be just as fascinated as I am. Even though, the first signal is like when they start to fall asleep in the meeting, maybe they're not quite as excited as you are. But maybe not. I do a lot. I mean, it depends on the idea. It depends on how dense the world is. Like I pitched a thing a while back to FX that was about a cop who's undercover in the Manson family in 1967. And just the amount of research it took to master what the LAPD was like then, what the Manson family was like then, how a cop could end up in the Manson family, undercover looking for something. That took a year. I was just reading. I just read and read and read and read and read and talked to people, talked to people. And the pitch took 20 minutes and sold in the room.
Fantastic. And did you have, though, anything like a Bible with character?
Yeah, I mean, I had, it's funny because I have a very good partner on that guy named Marty Edelstein, and I had like this, it was like the crazy book in 7, like all this stuff. And Marty's like, listen, it's a cop undercover in the Manson family, that's all I have to say. But I was so into it. Yeah, I had a lot when I started with that one. But they're all, as I said, they're all different, The Fugitive was actually the easiest because I didn't create The Fugitive. But I was at a studio that had the rights to the movie, And I called my boss, Peter Ross, and I said, I have the world's shortest pitch. Okay, I go, The Fugitive. Okay, let's do it. So honestly, it really depends. But you need good partners, you need a good advocate, you need, a lot of stuff, you need a lot of good luck, you need a lot of talented people down the line,
Now, traditionally, one couldn't do what you did, pitch, unless you were already in the game. Unless you were known to the networks. Now,
yeah.
that's
Or
sort of
sometimes
changing.
being known can be a bad thing, don't you?
Okay, but maybe that's sort of changing now. Julie, do you want to pick it up and speak to that? Who do you hear pitches from these days?
It is very hard to come directly into a studio and pitch an idea. And I think it's not that there isn't an appetite for fresh ideas. It's that you are only a group of, in the case of my department, there are 4 of us. And there has to be some system for getting people in the door who have a real shot at selling you something. And that system primarily is, either people coming up through being like writer's assistants on the staffs of television shows, where you get a writer's assistant job, and through that you sort of make some contacts, and then you kind of come up through the ranks within a writing staff, and then you start to build a reputation, or getting an agent. And there are many agencies of all different levels that I deal with on a very regular basis. So it's not just limited to, we'll only hear a pitch if it's Nick Pileggi or if it's Aaron Sorkin. It's not like that. And we love new writers, but even playwrights. I just read someone, a playwright who lives in New York, is from New York. I don't know how his agent found him, but it's an agent who calls me usually once a year and says, this is a star in the making. This is someone with no experience, no spec sample that's a television spec or a movie spec, but read these 2 plays. I read the 2 plays. It's an agent I really trust, and met with the guy, and I will make every effort I can to staff him on one of our new shows. But just by the nature of the volume of it, it's hard to come directly in and cold call someone at a studio and say, I have an idea and I want to come see you.
Now, if getting back to the process and where John left off, so he's pitching, and he's pitching to you, or
That's happened.
maybe
That's how they met.
the writer.
It was the beginning of a really bad romantic comedy because she hated me.
She passed on the project. She passed on that.
We're not going to tell the details of that story.
Let's make it more general. The writer is pitching to the studio executive.
Yes.
You love the idea. Now what?
Okay, so I love the idea. Often, right then and there, I will say to the writer, yes, this is amazing, let's do it. We then have to make a script deal. We get into an arrangement where either as the studio, we're committing money regardless of whether it sells, or we're doing what's called an if-come deal, which is we will go with you into CBS, let's say, because we think this is a slam dunk at CBS. If it doesn't sell at CBS, you're free to take your idea and go try to set it up somewhere else. So we do, it's like half and half. And then there's another situation, which is we have some writer and producer deals in overall deals on our lot, but that's kind of a different category. So I then give feedback in some form, or our department gives feedback on the pitch, which is great, we love it, here are some things to think about or questions we have. We hone it together, and in the meantime I'm scheduling it. I'm talking to my counterparts at the appropriate network and saying, this is great, here's the log line, here's the one line of it, here's the writer, here's a writing sample from the writer. We get scheduled to go in. We then collectively go into the network. On occasion, we'll feel like, this is great, but your relatively inexperienced, let us try to hook you up with a producer or a showrunner, or you will come in as a stronger package to the network if you have some guidance and some help, and so we can arrange that. And then we'll go in and pitch it to the network, and hopefully they'll buy it. And then we get into the development process. And the networks, like CBS is an example of a network, they develop probably 70 drama scripts each year. And we sell quite a bit. We now know, we're so familiar with our buyer that we sell probably 85% of the things we take in there. They'll develop those scripts, and then they'll shoot like 8 of them as pilots, and then probably 3 or 4 will get series orders.
And in the development phase, the network is giving notes. You're giving notes as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there are notes coming to the writers from all ends.
Yes, and what we like to think, but you'd have to talk to the writers we've worked with, but what we like to think is that the studio process makes the network process very smooth and easy. There are many situations where there are places where I think the relationship between the studio and network isn't necessarily as long-standing or as good as the company I happen to be in now. I mean, I was at ABC for many years before CBS. I think ideally the studio, again, has a very good connection to that buyer. And so the notes that you get, hopefully the writers are coming back and saying, oh, thank you, thank you, that made the network process really easy, and they think I'm amazing. That's what we aim for.
Now, for those of you students who might not understand the word notes, if you're not screenwriting students, maybe you haven't heard it, we're talking about basically their critiques, their comments, their suggestions for ways to improve the project. So now that the network greenlights it to go to pilot, and if it was a relatively new and experienced writer, a producer is found, maybe somebody like Sheldon. So take us through the next phase, through the pilot. What goes on now?
Well, you go through I want to emphasize the several drafts that are required. And by the way, parenthetically, I'd also like to mention that I assume with your process that you try to funnel all of the requests and changes that are to be made through one source, through you probably, as opposed to getting notes from the network directly to the writer, from you directly to the writer. Don't they normally go through you?
It depends. Usually once you get to the script having been written, the network will do a conference call, everything's called. Once you've pitched it, you never see me or any of the network people again. Everything's over the phone. Just the way business is done now. But usually, the network will never do anything without the studio, but they'll set a conference call and it'll be the writer and the studio. Sometimes the network will say things in that setting that are a little more general, a little more vague, and then they'll have an offline conversation with us saying, please, do what you can to help the writer understand this nuance, or, understand that we need this certain thing at that act break. But the network doesn't have a non-existent relationship with the writer. It's a little more removed.
Okay, to go back to your question.
Yes.
So now the Hallelujah Day, you get to pick up to pilot, and you will have, in an excess of enthusiasm, have already been doing lists, deciding who would be the perfect director for this, and by perfect you mean the one that the network would really like to be in business with. And if he's talented, so much the better. And you start to work alongside the network, just the way you did with the material. You work alongside the network to find somebody in all of the key positions that are acceptable or desired. Very often also, as Julie mentioned, they have deals with writers on the lot, networks also have deals with directors, people that are in big demand. They pay out a certain amount of a guarantee against their fees if a project goes forward. So they like to be able to use up those commitments. The networks and the individual executives of the networks and at the studio are more or less interested in the depth of involvement. Some want to be involved in every little detail. They want to know who the key grip is, you know, and the gaffer and so forth. Now, I'm exaggerating slightly, but basically it's casting and director, and maybe the DP. So you go out, you canvass who's available, you make it known to the agency community that you're looking for such and such, that you have a pickup, and everybody congratulates you and glad hands you and so forth. And then they look through their books and they say, geez, we haven't gotten such so-and-so a job in 3 years. Maybe we ought to throw him into the mix, or her. And you go through this process where everybody's got their own agenda. And part of what a network executive and a studio executive does is to try to sort of see through that agenda and also stick to their own opinions, to their own enthusiasms. And eventually, by going through this kind of process, you know, discarding the people that are thrown in because it's an obligatory name, and coming up with people that you really want, you staff the show, you staff the pilot, and then you go out and you shoot it. You have to, of course, during all this time, we're sort of giving short shrift to the budget, but believe me, that's a big part of the discussion. And the issue becomes particularly vexatious because you have the network putting up a certain amount of money, which is most often inadequate to complete the show, and that's known as deficit financing. Somebody has to make up the difference between what the network is paying and what the show costs to produce. And that, in many instances, can be many millions of dollars. So that's going on in the background while all these other discussions are taking place, because they're all interconnected. You may say, oh, geez, we'd love to have Steven Spielberg direct this for television, like he's going to do that. But he's going to cost, you know, $8 million if we can get him, and we're not going to spend $8 million, studio. How about you? You want to chip in? So you go through this process, and eventually you come up with somebody who's realistic in each position, and you come up with a budget which starts way up here, and the network wants it, and the studio wants it to be way down here, and you come up in the middle somewhere, and you go out and you shoot it and you cross your fingers.
And then
oh, and casting.
Oh, casting.
Casting, we forgot casting. I forgot casting. But it's pretty much the same story. You know, you have the headliners. Julie came in with big news this evening. Is it public news?
It's done, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't mind.
All right, on one of her pilots, she just signed Dennis Quaid, which was a big...
In the car on the way over.
You guys are good luck. Take you home with us.
And that is really important, because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters to the audience is what they see on screen. They don't normally read the credits. They don't care who produced it. They don't care who the director is. They don't care who the cinematographer is. They care about who the guy is saying the words, and they don't even care who wrote the words. So you go through the same process of looking for, you know, your dream world, your dream casting, and settling for some TV names, some sort of, you know, maybe feature names or used to be feature names. And you'd be amazed at how sometimes you wind up with absolutely wonderful casting. I mean, there's a show on now that called Luck on HBO, which, whatever you think of the show and the writing and the concept and the premise and so forth, still has Dustin Hoffman and Dennis Farina. And they're worth, and Nick Nolte. Yes, and a nice horse, too. A nice horse. I like the bay, though.
Somebody bet on it.
So that's part of the budget conversation, it's part of the creative conversation, who is going to be in the show, because it really is, as you can see from the Charlie Sheen hoo-ha of last year, it is the most tricky situation to deal with if you make the wrong choices, either creatively or from a personality viewpoint.
So you crew it, you staff it, you cast it,
You
shoot
budget
it,
it.
you budget it, it's in the can.
Right.
Now what? We go back to you, Julie?
Let's see. So you mean just in terms of the editorial process or how the decisions
Well,
are made?
Well, all right, so I mean, if we want to get into post-production, you know, that is the next phase, so please.
Okay,
Yeah.
so very brief time to cut these things. I mean, I think from a, I don't know, it's probably boring, but from a schedule standpoint, we start shooting our pilots like the third, fourth week of March, and they need to be delivered the first week of May. And the decisions of what's going on the air for next fall are made the second week of May. So the schedule is ridiculous. Most of the time, pilots, network pilots, they shoot anywhere from 12 to 14 days, and it's a 43-minute pilot that you're delivering. So the director will usually get like a 3-day pass at the material to cut it, and it's very truncated, and then the studio comes in, and the studio gets 2 days with it, and we test it with focus groups. Our testing process is very funny. Everybody does it differently, but we have a facility in Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas where people walk through, and you actually get people from all over the country because everybody goes to Vegas. So they walk through and they watch a pilot, and they comment on it, and you watch. You literally watch the focus groups talk about what they've seen and what they like and don't, and you understand very clearly how they're responding to it. And so then for us, the decision-making process happens, which is, we screen it for the presidents of the networks, then they screen it in New York and Los Angeles for their salespeople, their people who deal with the local affiliates in all the different markets, their business affairs people, their scheduling people, their casting people. Everybody at the network looks at it, and their opinion is weighed along with the focus group testing, and then just the instincts of the person running the network. And the information is kept very secret, and all the networks are trying to set their schedule without other networks knowing. Try to have a competitive advantage, and then the new fall schedule for September is announced in New York in May to all the advertising community, all the buyers for Nike and Kodak and Toyota and all of that, and they come in the case of our network, we all go to Carnegie Hall, and all of these ad buyers look at little clips of these pilots, and they see who the cast is, and they ultimately get sent the full pilot episodes, and they decide where to put their advertising dollars.
This show that you put on in Carnegie Hall, these are the upfronts.
These are the upfronts, yes. These are the upfronts. And in the meantime, I am like a crazy person trying to get writers for all these new shows. And so is every other executive at every other network and studio. You want amazing writers to, this information is kept so secret that you only find out just in advance of the presentation if your show is going forward. And then you and the producers of that show and the writer of that pilot, yay, it's so great, we're getting picked up to series, okay, who's going to write a new episode every 8 days for 22 episodes? So you've got to staff with writers.
And that's the so-called staffing season.
That's staffing season, which already now, all the agencies, we're having our meetings with the agents to talk about their clients, and I am, while I'll be on the sets of these various pilots, just kind of making sure everything's going okay, I'll be reading tons of writing samples from young writers, more experienced writers, mostly now I know a lot of the more experienced ones, so I read sort of like, you know, just people that I haven't encountered before, in an effort to then, once your show is going to get ordered to series, you don't want writing staffs that are made up of just people who have been on writing staffs before. You kind of want to have a great mix, and it's always really important because launching a series is incredibly challenging for the people doing it. Suddenly you've had 3 months to write your pilot script, and now you need a new episode written every 8 days and produced every 8 days. It's very challenging, and you really want a good writing staff. So then it becomes about staffing up with writers so that you can actually do a series.
And who ultimately makes the hiring decision? Is it the network, the studio, the executive producer of the show? Who?
Depends on who you ask.
Okay.
Say it's the executive producer of the show.
The executive producer should be.
Proposes, but the network disposes.
My name is not on the checks they get every week, as someone once reminded me. So, yeah, you get a big vote.
It's collaborative.
I mean, honestly, the only time I worked for a man named Stephen J. Cannell, and his name was on the check. Like, he's the only guy I ever worked for who had total autonomy, because it was his own money, his own company. But the rest of us, it's a collaborative. It's like politics. It's like you're constantly trading this loss for this victory, and hopefully not losing sight of which direction you're heading.
But can I just maybe interject slightly, which is that a lot of the producers that I work with, not always, but a lot of times, they're so happy. They're now getting like stacks from every agency of like 50 clients from each agency, and they're happy to have some guidance from us of
It's like having the really smart girl do your homework for you.
Here are some people that
For none of you know what Yeah, by the time you're finished with the pilot, which Julie and Sheldon described really well, you're like, hire, I don't care who you hire anybody. Is Manson available?
And so now you're staffed, and if the upfronts were in May, you're staffed by when?
June.
By June.
Yeah.
And well, now you're running the room, and you're guiding the writing of all the episodes.
You guys know what the room is? Writer's room? It's actually kind of cool. I mean, it's fun. Because writing is such a private, weird, internal process. But to write for television and run a TV show, work on a staff, you kind of have to have that inner private dream life. You actually have to have kind of okay social skills. Not all writers have okay social skills. You have to be able to sort of interactively collaborate on a story. And Julie and Sheldon both sort of, the mantra you probably are hearing is every 8 days, every 7 days. That pressure is really intense. It's like, it's tectonically intense. And the more loose and fun and creative a writer's room can be, the faster and better the work is. And writer's room is literally just a whiteboard, markers, and people just having ideas. Honestly, it looks so amateurish. I was just in the writer's room today thinking, like, that whiteboard with like those squiggles, that's $3 million worth of production. Literally, I took a picture of it with my cell. Actually, I have a picture of it on my cell phone. I'll show you later. It's craziness, That turns into television is amazing. Yeah.
So you're the executive producer. You're the showrunner, the creative, overseer. Everybody may operate differently, but do you, when you're doing this, do you in advance sort of have a sense as to the creative arc of the whole series, or do you allow it to be discovered in the room, or have you done it both ways?
I've done it both ways, and it's way better to know in advance and have your partners agree with you. Because it also had happened where I thought I knew, and the studio thought differently, and I thought differently. The best situation is, you can articulate early in the pilot process, really, where you want the thing to go, season 1, 2, 3, and so on. But I've also worked on shows where, there was no real mythology. It was just a case a week. And again, there's just trade-offs. I mean, those can be kind of more fun to write moment to moment because you're not beholden to a mythology. But there's something really satisfying about arcing something out like a novel, over many, many, many hours and years. So I thought both are good.
And using whichever method,
Yeah.
you ultimately have the 13, 26, however many episodes for the season at a certain point. And then as the executive producer, you assign different writers in
Yes.
the room to different scripts.
Yep.
They go out, they write their episodes,
Mhm.
and then what?
Well, to back up a little bit, you generally will, the story is usually kind of, on most of the shows that I worked on, I know House is the one show I know that was different than this. The whole room contributes to the story of each writer's episode.
Mm-hmm.
So like on Prime Suspect, every writer was expected to have a couple like little germ ideas, sort of throw them into a little pile in the middle of the room, and sort them through, and then start putting them on the board, and the ideas would sort of start to gel. Usually those ideas kind of like find the writer who's right for that idea. I don't know how it happens. It's the miracle of the theater. You know, and then that, yes, once that story's done, and to everyone's satisfaction, then you send the writer off to do his or her draft.
So you in the room have pretty much beat it out. Beat by
Yeah, and I know that like Law and Order and House are different. On those shows, you had a concept basically, and then the writer's expected to go off and do all of it, him or herself.
Mhm.
You know, which is equally valid way to run a show. You know, I've never worked on a show like that, but it sounds good.
The scripts come back,
Uh-huh.
you...
Ah, this is terrible! Oh my god!
and then they go back to work. And ultimately, a script is deemed ready for production.
Yeah.
And you're shooting a show a week.
Yeah.
And so now, same process as with the pilot, but once a week.
That's kind of where you find out whether or not you made really good hires.
Mhm.
Because a lot of you on the pilot will come to the series, and you've gone through the process of hiring a writing staff. And I've been on writing staffs and on shows where it just nothing gelled. It just everything was wrong. The crew's not the right crew, actor's not the right actor, writers are just not gelling. And I've been on shows like Prime Suspect, my most recent show, where everything gelled. And it was just a great feeling. It happens pretty rarely, you know, that it's a great group of people and it's a really good show. And that's a really nice feeling, because then you don't feel like it's pressured, you feel like it's exciting. So,
And then ultimately, the show gets aired.
yep.
Yeah, but you make it sound very sedate.
Make it sound the way it should
I'm
sound.
going to make it sound
Do
like
it.
it should sound. As Julie was describing in terms of the time frame, you know, when you get the pilot pickups and when you get the series pickup and so forth, you have a period of weeks before you start actually shooting the shows where you get a jump on the scripts. And so you start the season with maybe 6 scripts in the can,
Ooh.
if you're lucky.
Yeah. That'd be nice.
Maybe it's 4 scripts, maybe it's 3 scripts, whatever it is, you're a little ahead of the game. And then gradually, sometimes at the fault of the executive producer, because sometimes the writers are waiting on the executive producer, and sometimes the fault of the writer who's been assigned the script, who just simply not only can't break the script, but can't admit that he can't break the script. So as the season goes along, that lead time erodes. And then you see a panic like you have never seen. It's like they're going into D-Day. And I've actually had the situation where you wind up where you're getting the first day's script pages the first day of shooting. And you're hoping that you get the second day on the second day. Because otherwise you have to say it's a wrap, everybody goes home, and of course there's lawsuits to follow and so forth.
But like one day of shooting is something like $300,000,
Yeah,
basically.
exactly, exactly. So it is really, from an economic viewpoint, from a reputational viewpoint, it is a sort of catastrophic event. But it's always lurking there, that pressure.
Ingmar Bergman made a TV series, one TV series called Scenes from a Marriage. And he said, what's the difference between making a movie and a TV show? You're making a movie, you're just building a train track. Making a TV show, you're building a train track in front of a moving train. I think that's the best description I've ever heard in my life. I'm on a show now, I'm consulting on a show for some friends, and one of the reasons I was brought in was they literally were going to start shooting, and they had no scripts. And I'm like, well, when do you start shooting? And they're like, Monday. It's Thursday. What's going on? We had some problems, but literally we've been writing right up to the first day of pre-production. And generally handing in about, we've done better than 7 pages today. We've done like 8, 10, 12 pages just ahead of the train.
Oh.
And we're on our last week of shooting. Thank Jesus. But yeah, it's exciting. I'm so glad to be here. I like said to my coworkers, I gotta go. Good luck.
Because you do have to have, you know, some annoying little things, housekeeping things like read-throughs, like getting the pages out so they can be memorized before they hit the stage.
That's for wussies. Come on, you can make up your own dialogue. We're feeding you chicken.
And so once the show airs, and presumably next week there'll be another one, and so on. What's going on in the studio at this point? What goes on in the network at this point?
It doesn't get any. I've been doing this for like 15 years now, I guess, and it does not get any less nerve-wracking as you approach September. And still, for whatever reason, the lion's share of shows premiere in basically the same week or 10-day period of time in the fall. And I'm, you know, waking up at, you know, 5:30 in the morning, nauseously awaiting the numbers to come in and hoping that people came, because it doesn't matter, you know, now there's so much with all the blogs about the TV business and all the information that's out there, there's so much like behind the scenes stuff that gets thrown around, but none of it matters unless people come. And I've had the experience of working on something that I loved where people just didn't show up. I've had the experience of, you know, working at a network when I was at ABC. For 7 years I was there, and we couldn't get anybody to even know that we existed at ABC. And then in 1 week we had the premiere of Desperate Housewives and Lost. And both those shows, I had to call the ratings line. We didn't get it over BlackBerry at that time. I had to call it twice. I couldn't believe what the numbers were. I was completely shocked. So you hope that that people come. And then you don't feel all that much better if they do, because then you're just panicked, like, can we maintain this? We had a good pilot, and it really does come back. It always comes back to, does that person who sat on the couch with the idea, do they have a vision for what the show is? Do they really have a creative vision? And no matter what resources you try to add or who you try to have help, or if you don't have that, and if that vision doesn't meet up with what the network is looking for, it's tough. And if you ever have a situation where there's any executive who's trying to really guide do more, overstep and do more than just try to gently nudge here or there, you know you're in trouble. You know, you want somebody at the helm, you want that showrunner, or that showrunner in concert with that creator, to really have a true north of what they're trying to do. And then you start to feel like, okay, you know, maybe this could actually work. But often, in most of the shows that I've worked on, the first 5-6 episodes are not the strongest. You know, everybody's trying to figure out what it is. And at CBS, we're fortunate because we don't do a lot of kind of mythology shows. So even something like Hawaii Five-0, which didn't start off, we thought we did a really good pilot for what that was, but the first few episodes there was a lot of, I would say, the creators in that case really wanted to do an action show, and the network wanted something that had more investigative components to it and a little bit more of a mystery in how the stories would unfold. And there was a lot of kind of back and forth initially in the first few episodes. And we also had a showrunner in Peter Lenkoff who had run CSI in New York and was used to doing a certain kind of a case. And then we had Kurtzman and Orsi involved as well, who who come from that kind of big mythology world. And so it was a lot of just everybody with great intentions trying to figure out what it should be. So fortunately at CBS, you know, most of our shows, it's not flash forward, where you've got to immediately know, like, you got to know where that show's going and give the audience real security in that. With a cop show, if you have a few episodes at the beginning that are not your strongest and you haven't really found your strengths yet, people might still come just because there's going to be a dead body and it's going to close off, and there may be enough chemistry in the cast that that will carry you through that early time. But you're still trying. Just because you had a successful pilot and you have people come doesn't mean that everybody knows what the series is and everyone's moving in the same direction. So it remains challenging and in a more compressed period of time. And then, you know, the network and studio are then trying to just make sure that, you know, from our standpoint, that the network is promoting the hell out of it and, you know, giving it every opportunity. The publicity is working really hard to make sure that you know, it keeps building viewership. And we're continuing to work and give notes on the scripts, and then again there's like this handoff to the current division that will then take it from there.
You mentioned before that roughly 10-day period in September when most shows premiere. Mm-hmm. That's the long-standing tradition in broadcast television. Is it changing? Will it change? Might it change? You know, for a variety of reasons, all the new platforms for distribution, internet, smartphones, the cable networks that are operated on different seasonal timetables. Are we still going to see that, you know, tradition of September, you know, premieres for new shows?
I think, and we talk about this a lot, and I've experienced I've experienced a number of successful mid-season launches. I mean, Grey's Anatomy was one of them, and, you know, huge and Body of Proof, and there are a lot of recent examples of series that premiered out of that clutter. Right now, it remains driven by the advertising community. They decide where they're going to spend the lion's share. They hold out a portion of their ad dollars for what's called the scatter market, where they can decide where they're going to put their ad money in TV shows later in the season. But they really drive it. In that period in May, when those upfronts happen, they really decide where they're putting their money, and network television is an ad-based business. I mean, so that's really what continues to drive it. I know other networks, Fox has talked, you know, a lot about it, but it's still, there's also a perception that there are periods of the year, like stuff that's launched in the summer. Cable does it very successfully. USA, which is the show that John's consulting on, they're premiering this show Common Law in
May.
Yeah. But at network, there's also still a little bit of a perception that shows that are premiered in that time period are like a burn-off, that you can't really get a broad swath of audience to engage in a new show at that time. So it's kind of a combination of factors. For us, I don't think it's really changing anytime soon.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your career paths. I know that students always like to hear, you know, how you got to where you are. So, you know, we heard a little bit, John mentioned briefly that he was a playwright. So let's start with John, and then we'll work this way.
After a rather ignominious education period, which I was kicked out of a college, accepted another college, yeah, I started writing plays in New York, and then I wrote a children's book that got published, and then didn't work for 2 years. And then finally was convinced to come out here and try and get into TV, and it was, you know, like the usual sort of like I wrote a lot of stuff that people liked, didn't want to buy, and then they would buy it, but they didn't want to make it. And I had a really good professor in college. He's actually one of the Hollywood 10, he's a blacklisted writer, Ray Lardner Jr.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you got to give it 7 years, like before you can even think about making a living. I'm like, oh my God. I'll be 29, oh my God. But he was kind of right. It took a lot of years of like just trying stuff, you know, and I would take any job I was offered, you know.
Were you writing original pilots? Were you writing,
I remember that as sort of like a
specs?
period of everything. Meeting, pitching, writing, you know, as I said, I wrote actually 2 children's novels, plays, radio plays, you know, and I thought I was going to be a comedy writer, and I sort of slowly gravitated more toward drama, and I got really lucky. I got Norman Lear had a company that was, again, like Steve Cannell later. It was Norman's company, Norman's money. He worked for Norman, and he read a play of mine, kind of like Julie's story. You know, they read one of my plays and said, "Oh, you want to write a movie?" And I'm like, "Yeah." "Want to hire me?" He's like, "Yeah." And that sort of was my first real studio job, where I was in the Writers Guild and I had health insurance and I could afford my rent and my Toyota Corolla payments. And I wrote movies for about, I would say about 4 or 5 years, and I got kind of burned out on it. Because you can make a very good living as a screenwriter and never have anything made. It's kind of amazing. It's weird. It's like your neighbors think you're a drug dealer. Because you sleep till 10, you work for 3 hours, you have all this, like, you know, I can have like a Cuisinart and nice stuff, but like, what do you do all day? And that's when I was very lucky to just one day got my agent at the time left the business. His name was Paul. And he said, "I want you to sign with this agent friend of mine. His name is Paul too, so it won't be too hard to remember his name." And the new Paul was a TV agent, had no interest in movies. And he goes, "You're not doing movies anymore. Movies are a waste of time. Movies are bullshit. You're doing television." I'm like, "Okay, that sounds good. All right." And we slowly I sort of went to the back of the class again, started over, you know, as a staff writer, and I was hired to be a story editor on a show. And just sort of worked my way up, you know. I mean,
what are the ranks of writers on a TV show?
Staff, well, the freelance script, staff writer, story editor, executive story editor. I skipped that one. Went right to co-producer, producer, supervising producer, co-executive producer, executive producer. And this one? Coach. Yeah, I've been like almost all of those guys. Oh, and what I am today, which is this week, is a consulting producer. Which is, you know, a guy who comes in and goes, blah, 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 do this, do that, you know. I gotta go, I gotta be in Northridge. See you later, good luck with what you're shooting tomorrow, because I have no idea.
I'm glad for your consultancy.
But you know, I mean, I'm being a little bit glib about the fact that one of the things that got me very excited about television was working on my first real series, which is called The Adventures of Briscoe County. And it was co-created by Carlton Hughes, who did Lost, and is still a very good friend of mine. And it was so exciting because that show, like a lot of the shows you described, was one where we ran out of scripts really fast. So even as a lowly story editor, my boss would come in and go, "Write me a scene about Briscoe's lost, it was a Western. Briscoe's lost his horse, and he has to buy a horse from a used horse salesman." And I'm like, "What the fuck is a used horse?" All right, fine. You write it, you're like, "I'm going to get fired for this." You hand the pages in, the boss goes, "Whatever, I'm fine." You shoot it, and it's good. And no one had time to like think about it or whatever. And as a movie writer, I spent a lot of time just, it felt like spinning wheels. You know, and finally at the end, you start out with like 120 pages, you end up with 120 pages. And you just do it over and over and over again. TV was crazy and great because literally the thing that I wrote on a Monday was shooting on a Wednesday and we're cutting on Friday. It was on TV the next week. And I was like, this is a great job. And they bring you food. Every day. I am not kidding. You're in your office, they come with a menu, and they're like, "What do you want?" I'm like, "Can I have this and this?" They're like, "Yeah." Every day.
We don't pay for that anymore.
I know, you guys are horrible.
So you won't be pitching her anytime soon.
Yeah. But yeah, and then what that develops an appetite. Your appetite then increases because not your appetite for food. And I'm switching to loftier things. You suddenly think, gosh, what if this was my show? You know, what if I had the idea for the whole show and I wasn't just the guy writing the used horse salesman scene? That's great, but you know, I want my own thing, and that that's a good, healthy, competitive spirit that comes up within you. You know, you want your own show. And it comes with many, many wonderful things and many, many things that you look and you just go like, why did I want this job? It's 2 in the morning and, you know, the actors drive me crazy and the students drive me crazy, but it's, you know, it's a good gig.
Well, thank you. Julie, how did you get to where you are today?
I was born lucky. Just very briefly, I didn't know what I wanted to do after I got out of college. I took an unpaid internship at the National Endowment for the Arts in Washington. I had gone to Washington to go to grad school in foreign relations. I dropped out. I didn't like it. I managed to get this internship, and I met a gentleman there who was the president of the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center, which is a nonprofit theater development organization in New York and Connecticut. I worked there for about 3 years. And then I felt like maybe I was ready to kind of come back to Los Angeles and see if I could potentially get into this crazy business. I knew at that point I loved working with writers, and that maybe, you know, I'd gotten a little confidence where I could maybe come back here and see if I could make a go of it. And theater also, I felt like as I looked down the road in theater, I felt like ultimately, it was a real crossroads for me, but I felt like ultimately that was a very slow game. And even though I loved working at this nonprofit, I think one play was produced out of the 3 years that I was working there doing these staged readings, and I just saw that the process of that was probably not for me. So I came back and I said to my father, I'll meet with anybody. Please, you know, see if anyone will meet with me. And the interesting thing is that I met with, he was very well known and connected in the movies for television arena, movies and miniseries. And so I ended up meeting with a few people, and I met with one woman who did that at ABC. And this was a very good lesson for me because she didn't have a job for me, but she called like a month later and said, I don't have anything, but someone in drama series is looking for an assistant. And so I got that job, and I was an assistant at ABC in drama development for, I think, 4 years.
Being an assistant entails what?
It entails a lot of scheduling. It depends on your boss. It really does. Answering the phones, doing a lot of scheduling, travel, you know, bringing people in for meetings to the office and making sure they're comfortable. And then ultimately, you know, after a period of doing your assistant job well, in my case, my boss was very open to the fact that I was reading the scripts that were coming in for the shows that she was working on. I would give her a little bit of feedback, and so ultimately through that relationship, she went to bat for me to get a promotion to an executive job eventually at ABC. And so then I was a manager of development, which is the sort of entry-level junior executive job, and there went through becoming a director and a VP, and ultimately sort of co-ran the drama series division at ABC, and I left the year after that Housewives Lost Grey's year, moved over to CBS, and I've been at CBS ever since. And I will say one thing I will say to you guys, just, you know, no matter what you ultimately want to do or what area you're in, I do meet a lot of 20-somethings who, you know, come out of school and work as assistants in my department or in other areas, and I think so much of the attitude you bring with you to that job, and, you know, I say to my assistant now, you know, the fact that, you know, he is great at just making sure that everything goes well, that's no different really from being an executive producer. You know, he's doing it on a certain scale, but with with an attitude and an approach that is like, I'm going to make it work, and I'm going to learn all that I can in this job. And I just think that's really important. And there have been some situations where people have come in and there's more of a sense of, and I know I was grateful and terrified when I got my first assistant job, and I would have done anything to make sure that I was doing the best job I possibly could. Sometimes people come in and there's a little bit of a sense of, well, being an assistant, that's, why should I have to do that, or, you know, I'm wasting my time doing that or whatever. But it's really a great training ground, and you also get to talk to the major players. You know, you're having agents call in, you're having, you know, other producers call in, writers, and you get to really know the business that way. So I recommend it. It's a good way to go.
And two things that I'd like to add to that. One is just to reinforce the fact that, you know, it is a job that can lead you anywhere in this business. You can be an assistant to an executive, you can be an assistant to a producer, to an agent, and if you do as Julie did and do anything and everything that's asked of you with a great attitude, you know, that impresses. And you can take that in any direction you want. And then the other thing to keep in mind that I want to add to this is, for those of you who are going to make your way into the business and you're going to be calling producers' offices and agents' offices and maybe executives' offices, and you're going to get the assistant on the phone, just remember this: the assistant of today will be the producer, the agent, the executive tomorrow.
I'm working for one of them now.
There you go. Make them your friends. It's, you know, it's really just stupid to do otherwise. So, and Sheldon, your rise to where you ended up.
Well, I've lived longer than them, so my story's going to take longer. I'm going to start with what's going to seem like a non sequitur, but it really isn't. It'll come together. Growing up, my big passion was aviation. I was going to be an aeronautical engineer, until I realized that I wasn't good at advanced mathematics. So I dropped Plan A, and this is a whole series of dropped plans, which should be a reassuring lesson to everybody. Having nothing more specific to do, I went to law school. I got through it and practiced law for a couple of years and decided that it really wasn't for me. I was practicing criminal law for the most part and labor law. And I just didn't want to spend my life practicing criminal law and labor law. So I looked around for job opportunities, and one that was open was at, and here's lesson A, while law school was not the path I would, ultimately recommend for where I wound up, it did enable me to get a job at NBC, my first job in the business, not in the creative area, but in the department that negotiated all the deals, the talent deals, the packaging deals, and so forth. So I was able, because I knew nothing about the entertainment business. I had to have my brother explain to me who the William Morris Agency was.
I'd still like to know.
But I did meet Mike Ovitz at the Morris Agency, so that's another thing that paid off in the end. In doing that job, I not only learned about the structure of the business, but I learned about the areas that might ultimately interest me. I mean, there's a lot of things, we've gone through them in discussing how productions are done and so forth. 90% of them were of no interest to me whatsoever. I didn't want to be a production designer, I didn't want to be a choreographer, I didn't want to do this or that or the other. But I did want to be either a writer, a producer, or a director. And here it's very important to realistically appraise your strengths and your weaknesses, because we have two lives going side by side, most of us. One is the us that we think we are, and the us that we really are. And so over the years that I was doing this job, I realized that I probably didn't have the detail, I wasn't detail-oriented enough to be a director. And besides, I didn't like getting up at 5 in the morning. So that was out. Writing was a possibility, but was, as John indicated, a very iffy proposition. And I wasn't willing to wait the 7 years. So that left producing. So now the question became, how do I contrive to put myself in the position to become a producer? Well, step one was go into the creative area so people would take you seriously as a creative individual. I was able to do that through political manipulation at the network. Then an opportunity came up for me to go to Warner Brothers in charge of their television operation. I did that for a while. I won't go into details because it's long and boring. But then I got a call from Mike Ovitz, who I knew from the Morris Agency, to come over and become a packaging agent at the CAA, which had newly opened about a year and a half, 2 years previous. I thought, well, that is another step on the road to becoming a producer. You see, that's why it's important to then have, even if it's in the background of your mind, not at the forefront of your thinking, where do you want to wind up? Just keep that, the eye on the prize, as the old cliche goes. So I went to the agency, and I worked there for about 4 years, and met the people that were ultimately, it was a husband and wife team, that were ultimately to become my producing partners. So we had discussions and so forth and so on. I was very fortunate in finding two of the really good people in the business. We went into business together, and here's the punchline about the aeronautical engineering. Because of my interest in flying, I would read air and aviation, no, not the air and space.
NTSB?
No, Aviation and Space Technology was the name of a magazine, a publication. And they did all the NTSB reports on accidents, on aviation accidents, even on train accidents, strangely enough. But there was one report that read just like a detective story to me. That was the Air Florida crash on the Potomac River, which you guys may or may not remember. But it was a real detective story about what brought the plane down and who survived and who didn't survive. And I thought, you know, now that I've gone into business with these people that I had met through the agency, it was expected that I demonstrate the ability to sell and to produce projects for the network. So I was thinking, how do I characterize this, going back to the pitches that John and Julie were talking about, how things get sold to a network. So thought about it a while. I went in and I said, Bridge of San Luis Rey on an airliner. And I sold it on that one line. Now, the issue was, so the lesson there is, whatever you're interested in, whatever education you have, whatever background you have, always use that to your advantage in this business. Because one of the great pleasures of being in the entertainment business is you get to enter worlds you wouldn't otherwise be in. You know, I did a mini-series called, based on the Gore Vidal book, Lincoln. Well, like John said about his research on the Western, the research that had to be put into doing a Civil War project, doing it accurately, doing it where it's emotionally resonating and so forth, is puts you in a different world, and an interesting world. Doing a picture about an air crash and what caused it and what could have prevented it and why some people survived and why others didn't survive, put you in a different world. I did another movie with the United States Navy where it required that I do a catapult shot off an aircraft carrier and landing on the deck of an aircraft carrier. Puts you in a different world. It's one of the really great things about being in this business. And I was able to do that movie, went through the whole process that Julie and John were describing. And to my great satisfaction, it took the week in the ratings. And that was the way I wound up doing what I was doing. That led, once I got that in and had the ratings, the favorable ratings behind me, Went into another project, the Wayne Williams case, the Atlanta child murders, and then another one and another one, and I was in business.
You were. Great. Well, thank you. I think maybe it's time to open the floor to you guys, if any of you have any questions for any role of our panelists.
Hi, I actually have a question for you, Julie. Do you think that the diversity writing programs that the network are running are a viable way to get access to getting into the rooms?
I'm nodding. I'm nodding.
Yes, it's interesting because at ABC, the diversity workshop provided a writer free to the producers. So you could, a diversity writer would be on the writing staff. And at CBS, that's not our situation. We have a diversity writing program with a mentorship. I do think it's a good way. My first mentee at ABC was Vina Sood, who just created The Killing. And she went on to Push Nevada at the time, was what she went into. I think it's a great way in the door. And that's what you're really looking for. You want to be, and that's where I talk about a writer's assistant, or what gets you kind of in that room or in that environment to make those relationships that ultimately are going to help you. So I do think it is. I mean, and I wish at CBS we did that. We do fight very hard to make sure that the writing staffs are diverse in some way. Sometimes we're more successful than other times in doing that, but I think it's great where that's additive for the show itself, where even if someone is not experienced, because it's free to the show initially, it's a great way of doing it. I think it's great, yeah.
Yeah. How often do you guys, you guys have shows, and I'm sure it comes to a point where it's like, this is going to sell. It's just a kind of common idea. You have the data to back it up. How often do you guys feel comfortable with taking risks as far as, we haven't done this before, let's try it, let's try it for the sake of trying it, or is it just too much of a gamble that you don't want to get into too often, or you try and do it once a year, or once a season, or?
I'm very driven by, I suppose all my experience as a buyer weighs into it, but I'm also very driven by my gut feeling. So if there's something, you mean like if the idea feels very...
It feels like, like for example, like Lost is kind of, for when it came out, it's definitely a left ball. It's not an original, it was not mainstream at the time.
Yeah.
How do you get upon that? You're just like, this just sounds like a great show, let's just go ahead and do it? Or is it?
Lost is interesting.
Yeah.
It was an executive's idea. Was it Lloyd's idea?
Yeah, it actually, Lost was generated by, at that time, the president of ABC, who went first to one writer and then ultimately to JJ to do I want a bunch of people on an island. But I totally take your point of, things that feel a little more out there. Really depends, I think, from my perspective as a studio person, who is my buyer. So I do have a sense of what CBS will do, of what CW will do. Sometimes, there are ways to go out of that, but to do it smartly, I think. I'll just give you an example that I'm dealing with right now, which is this past season. I don't know if any of you watched either Playboy Club or Pan Am, but those were two efforts they were out there ideas, and they were efforts at doing a period piece. Great efforts, didn't ultimately, succeed. For us in doing a period piece, we're shooting a pilot right now that we're starting production on shortly that is set in 1960. And it's about the sheriff in Las Vegas, Ralph Lamb, a real guy, who was recruited to be the sheriff in Vegas in 1960 because the mobsters were all coming in and basically buying off law enforcement. So the only person they could find in Vegas to do the job was a rancher and his two brothers. And so you have this cowboy culture meeting the sort of the clash of the mob and the Rat Pack. What it does for me as a buyer is it's a cop show ultimately. He's a sheriff, so every week I know there can be a case. There's somebody missing or there's somebody dead. There are inherent stakes that can be wrapped up at the end of the episode. But it's still kind of risky. I mean, it's a 1960 cowboy mob epic, you know? So if I was at ABC, maybe I would do Pan Am or Playboy. But at CBS, you know, part of my job is to have an eye on that buyer too. So I like to do things that are different. And even at CBS, we develop some soap operas and some things that you might not expect. But I also do have an awareness of the buyer. But usually now, between the network marketplace and the cable space, no idea is really too outlandish. Like there's usually somewhere for any idea if it's well and deeply executed, I think.
All right, I'm graduating this spring, as I know a lot of my friends are, and we're all going out into the workforce, and personally, I want to get into a writer's room and be either an assistant or, you know, if the lottery wins, I'll become a writer. What would be the right steps to go about, fresh from college with not really much experience, how would you go towards getting a writer's assistant job?
Do you know anybody in the business? I mean, anybody. Like,
With their production?
doesn't matter.
Okay.
I mean, try and get a production job, and then just, like Sheldon said, politic your way toward the writer's room. Writer's rooms gravitate toward enthusiastic, smart people, you know, who can be fun to work with at 2 in the morning. When it's just dog tired, and, you know, I mean, I've been in writers' rooms where the assistant had a great idea, and a couple weeks later, you know, we had a script open up, and we were like, well, Fred had this good idea. Let's just give him a draft. I just want to go home, man. I mean, I had a lot of assistants I've worked with have become showrunners, you know, producers, writers, directors, showrunners. You know, everybody starts something. So, you know, I would use every single, you know, contact you have, and then some, and just try to get the door. Just get them a lot. You know, Spielberg, story with Spielberg was, you know, that's right, 18 years old, University of Arizona dropout, and he literally gets a briefcase, puts on a suit, walks by the guard, goes like this, finds an office, it's empty, and sits there. It's a true story. And pretty soon, somebody's like, who are you? He goes, I'm Steven Spielberg, I'm, you know, and he, 2 years later, got a job directing an episode of a TV show. Just by sort of like moving, I'm not suggesting you do that, nowadays you get arrested. But what I think he did that was very smart was he put himself behind the gate. And the way to do that is to be an assistant, is to just do whatever you have to do to get behind the gate.
And is that probably the best route today to break into television writing, the writer's room, to be an assistant, a writer's assistant?
I mean, also write something fantastic. Julie is very modest about her achievements, but I'll just give you a brief story about it. It's probably the same agent who discovered Alice Cunningham, right? He called you today, the playwright? Or no? Jonathan?
No, it was Mark.
Whatever, okay. Oh, Mark Carr, I hate that guy. He's one of my agents. Julie found a playwright who's completely unproduced, outside of like off Broadway, never done TV. She read a play. She so loved the play, she asked to meet this writer. The writer came out, she got her a job at NYPD Blue as like the lowest level staff writer. She had this slow climb in a career, and we all became friends, and this past year, she was my boss. So it started with an amazingly good play that you've never heard of. So I'm not being facetious, write something great.
It's also helpful if you know who you're going to work for, even if you're going to work delivering coffee. I mean, one of the last series that I did was called Any Day Now for Lifetime. And in the 6 years of that show, we had 4 people who were delivering coffee and sandwiches and doing scut work who became staff writers on the show, and 2 others from whom we bought spec scripts that they wrote for the show, which obviously then gave them a calling card to go on to other things. Now, one of the reasons for that is that Nancy Miller, the creative executive producer on the show, was open to that. She was just she still is, she's a wonderful woman who wants to help people and wants to recognize new talent, wants to reward new talent and foster new talent. So it's obviously better if you go into a situation like that than if you go in with some grumbling old, never mind, you know, who just takes satisfaction in beating people down. And there are such people in the business. I'm sure that comes as a big shock to you. So know your customer.
Know your customer, great. Yeah.
You mentioned Grey's Anatomy, and Shonda Rhimes was fresh out of USC or something like that, if I remember correctly.
She had written, I want to say,
Princess
a
Irish.
Disney movie. Yeah,
Okay.
she had written one movie, but she was pretty,
Yeah, pretty fresh.
yeah.
You mentioned you read, you know, obviously a ton of scripts. So what is it that you're looking for when you read, you know, even like you said, you read the voices that you know already, you know, you kind of know what to expect from those guys, but when you're looking for something else, what is it that you're looking for on that page?
I think one aspect is just that I'm compelled to keep reading. Another aspect is a freshness, especially if it's a new writer, you know, just a freshness to the perspective, that you don't feel like it's somebody who has necessarily just watched a lot of TV or seen a lot of movies. It's someone who comes to it, comes to writing with something to say, and that thing is said in a unique way. I want to be moved, you know, on a very basic level. I just want it to move me somehow. I want to feel like I'm drawn into the characters. And then I feel like things like the act break structure and the, you know, procedural, you know, aspects for that kind of show, that stuff can be learned. But I feel like if there's something just, you know, in the dialogue and in the characters that's special, I mean, that's really what it is for me.
And do you suggest having original content as well as, you know, specs for a currently existing show?
I think so, yes. Most of the producers, and you guys can speak to this too, most of the producers that I work with, if they're going to hire someone on staff, they would like to read both if possible, something original in any form. It can be a play or a movie, or a TV pilot, a spec pilot, and then also something that sort of demonstrates that you can capture the vibe and the voice of an existing show.
I have changed careers, much like you have, and I'm learning a lot about the structure of the entertainment world. And something that I did not know and would like to know a little bit more about is, and I haven't heard you all mention yet, is showrunner school. I had never heard that until I came and studied it. So can you talk a little bit about that?
You talking about the Writers Guild?
Well, my neighbor, who also is a writer, he was telling me that basically a friend of his wrote a very successful television program, but because he was so new, the network was like, well, we should get showrunners, etc., to help you. Well, no, there wasn't anybody available, so they said basically you have to go to showrunner school. And I have, what is this? I've never heard of such a thing. And he said there's actually a place where they go and educate
Showrunner
you.
training
Well,
program.
yeah,
So-
I think the only thing I would disagree with is I don't believe I've ever heard of a network that would ever say to somebody, go to showrunner school, come back in 6 months with your diploma. It doesn't really work like that.
Yeah.
I mean, what the showrunner training program at the Writers Guild is it's geared toward low but more to mid-level writers who've had experience on staff. So you've been a story editor, you've been a producer, you've been a supervising producer. And it's a training program where showrunners basically have symposiums like this with a group of sort of middle-range, middle-level writers who are making a living, but they've never run a show. And they sort of tell them what to prepare for, how to do everything from how to run a writer's room to how to arc out a series. And you get guys like John Wells comes in, Aaron Sorkin comes in, and I think it's about a 3-month program. But I'm not really sure it has any bona fides. Like honestly, like if that guy, let's say call him Joe Smith, came out of that program, wrote a great pilot, gave it to Julie, she got it greenlit at the network, and they'd be like, well, who's going to run the show? Well, Joe Smith went to showrunner school, like, what the fuck is showrunner school? Who's going to run the show? Who's run a show? And honestly, it's this really unfair thing of like, you don't get to run a show until you run a show, but that's not really true. You kind of, my first boss was Carlton Hughes, and then I worked for Stephen J. Cannell, and so I worked for guys who sort of showed me how to run a show. Bob Singer, and you generally will start your career out by writing something, and it'll be sort of godfathered or shepherded by someone who's much more experienced than you. Showbiz, by the way, the program is great. It's a great program. I mean, I've
but it is already once you're
established.
somewhat established.
Yeah. My neighbor was pulling my chain.
It sounds like maybe a little game of telephone happened.
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, there could be another writing thing we don't know about.
Yeah, maybe there
It
is.
could be a thing. I'd like to go to it.
As long as it's not one of those, do you want to get your kids into showbiz?
We'll only charge you $100,000.
Right.
I have a question, because, and this is not from a writing standpoint, this is as an audience member standpoint, because, I kind of commit and work out my schedule based on, because there are certain programs that I have to watch 20 minutes after they start so I can fast forward through all the commercials, but I have to see it that particular night. And then there are shows that I stack up on my DVR. But what really annoys me is when the networks move a show and then it conflicts with something else that I'm already committed to. And I'm just trying to figure out, because this seems, first of all, the cable stations, the closer, it comes on every Monday night. It doesn't matter when they decide they're going to start that show, it's going to be on Monday night. I know I can
Except it's ending this season, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
But
prior to that, I didn't want to break it to you.
Right. I just use that as an example because that's one of the shows I can staff. But I'm just trying to figure out from a network standpoint, like, is it because the network isn't committed to the show, or it's trying to help it find an audience? Why? Now, at least the blogs are saying there's a lot of chaos going on at NBC, but The Firm is probably the most prime example. That show, I think they said, had chapter 7, so it's been on for 7 weeks, and only 2 weeks it was on the same night, at the same time.
I can address that. It is possibly the lowest rated scripted drama in the history of television.
But why are they?
It came in 8, in a race of 4.
But I'm wondering.
By a lot.
But why is they canceled? Is it because it's John Grisham?
No, because the Canadian, it was made by a Canadian company that made 22 anyway, and they're just tossing on a Saturday night to burn it off.
And they probably don't have anything ready to put in there. I think, what did they announce? They announced
Awake.
They have
March
another one.
4th, I think that comes on.
Yeah, but there is a lot of chaos there right now, and so then it's like, well, do we just, okay, we'll throw in some Grims over here to see if we can get a few more people, because that show's kind of working on the other night, but it's a little chaotic there.
What if, for example, like you're working, I know that a lot of people are freelancing now, and it's just generally like the factory system seems to be phasing out completely, especially in post-production. What if you're working in a situation where you're with a studio and you're working in post, and you're working with freelance post-production people, and you want to get in on staying on staff, but there's only like 1 or 2 people who are actually technically on staff in that. So you're around the environment the whole time, but no one's going to really hire you because they're all freelance, they're all kind of doing their own thing. what's a good way to kind of navigate your way in? I know there's no clear path, but
I don't know if you both have insight into that, because I don't have a lot of connection with how that works in terms of the personnel in post and freelance versus, you know, hired by the studio on a longer term basis. I don't know, maybe you have more experience, or you have more experience.
I'm retired. Not my problem anymore.
Tell them about Dory, because she was answering your phones, and she's now a very big post-production
Yeah,
person.
that's not an answer to this
No, I know.
gentleman.
How did she get in your door to do post-production?
She was, this is a wonderfully talented woman that worked for me for many years, who got in the door again by delivering coffee and doing errands around the office and
Coffee and food are the
scheduling.
key here.
And it changed to yogurt at some point along the line. But she applied herself and learned all she could about post-production, and now she's one of the most in-demand post-production people in the television business. And she works freelance, and she works on staff, mainly freelance though. But I'm not sure I understand the thrust of the question. Why, if you're working freelance, the word wouldn't get around about your abilities?
it just seems. I mean, it seems like I'm doing post-production internship stuff right now, and it seems like everybody's just kind of Warner Brothers.
Oh.
In television distribution, but it seems like they're all just kind of like freelance, and I love, I'd pay to work there. I mean, I love the job. It's a cool gig.
It's a great lot too.
Yeah, it's sweet. But the thing is, like, I don't see a whole lot of latitude for me afterwards. Even though I'd love to keep going there. It's just they have their cycles. It's like
when you're talking about latitude afterwards, that's a dangerous way of thinking, because everybody in the business feels they will never work again once their current gig is over. So if you let that get to you, you should go in a different line of work. Something will happen. Something will come between the time you're working now on a freelance basis and the time you lose that job. Something else has to show up, which brings to mind another very important thing: the importance of networking. Go in there and get to know the guys in the next editing bay and the guys and girls and go out to lunch with them and do networking, so that there will be a place for that next offer to come from.
They have good ideas.
Yeah.
It really is. It's kind of as simple as that. I mean, like if you end up in a room, like on my last show, it's screen an episode and the editor was there, I was there, the writer was there, and kind of in the doorway, some assistants. And we go, well, this is a disaster, what do we do? One of the assistants goes, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, that's a good idea, what's your name? I probably would forget it, but no. No, but it's like, one of the common themes here was we've all been entry level, and I think all three of us have, from a room full of people, said that person and I have a certain connection. And he or she may be bringing me coffee today, or yogurt, or what have you, but I see in them ability. I see in them drive and character and work ethic, and my next show, I'll bring you on, because people in my past believed in me in that way. I think a huge part of it is you want to pass on the good fortune that you've had. If you've had good fortune, you want to pass that on. And so I'm on a low level. I'm sort of looking for people to mentor and people to bring up. Because I want to be like Sheldon. I want to be retired soon. I can't do this forever. You guys are all young.
But yeah, that's the downside, by the way, of the business, especially the production end. Julie's got it made. No, I'm just kidding. But in the production end of the business, sometime at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, sort of towards the end of the week, and you're standing on a concrete stage somewhere, and it's raining out, it's cold out, and whatever, you're going to say, why the hell did I want to do this? I could be in a nice cushy office wearing a white shirt and tie. But, that's a choice everybody in the room has to make.
And the idea of freelancing is important. In post-production, in production, for those of you who are interested in various crew type positions, it is a world of freelancers. Film and television gypsies, and I was going to say ingratiate, maybe that's not the right term, but you impress.
In a way, every job is freelancing.
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
here's the thing, like, you're on a show, it runs for 10 episodes. You're on ER, the ER ended. So all those people are looking for work, you know? I mean,
But-
they're all just various forms of a life cycle. They're gonna go for a while, and then they're gonna end. And you're literally back out there going like, please, let me back in the game.
Yeah, so if you want to be an editor and you're right
Oh,
now
man.
interning in a post-production house, or, you know, on the studio lot, you know, it's the editors who hire their crew. The editors hire assistant editors and down the line. And those are the people whom you want to impress. And
I will tell you, like there's this guy, Joe, I have to look up his name, but I'll remember it, who would deliver the DVDs of cuts to my house. A really nice guy, and very early on I said, please don't ring the bell because I have a child who can barely get to bed, and I want to wake him up. And he never rang the bell, ever, in the 6 months he worked for me. I'll never forget that. And when I see him again, I remember his name. That's a guy I'd be like, hey, you want to be an assistant editor? Because he did his job really well. He listened, he was sensitive, and did his job well. So, didn't wake up David.
You had mentioned that, you look through so many ideas, you funnel it down to say 80 or so, then you shoot so many pilots, and then it goes let's say four land on a network. Do you ever go back to any of those pilots that were shot or any of those original ideas and try again, or do they, once they pass through, they're gone?
Sometimes we do. Two series that were on the air or are on the air were developed twice. So the show Numbers was actually shot as a pilot the prior year. The casting wasn't right, the direction wasn't right, so it was recast and reshot and then became a series. Hawaii Five-0 was developed as a script from a different writer the previous season. It was just dead. And then we worked with a different set of writers, and then it became a series. So if there's a lot of belief in a particular concept, sometimes probably of the 50 scripts, let's say, that we do as a studio, maybe 3 or 4 of them are rolled to the following season, which is the network is still intrigued, kind of like, can we either different writer or different execution, or we picked the wrong pilot case or something of that nature. So there does tend to be a little bit of a shiny penny quality to the business too, because it's a very subjective business. Oftentimes the new thing will excite everybody for no particular reason. The thing from last year may be just as interesting, but it has happened.
Anybody else?
Yeah. I was Julie. Do you write at all? Because I feel like I don't necessarily write, but I can, if I read a script or if I hear a pitch, I can tell if I like it or if it's good or if it has potential. So.
Do I write?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
You just know that. Okay.
But I think like for a big part of the phase of my job, I'm like an editor. I feel like I'm working very closely with the writer and on things big and small, on specific lines of dialogue sometimes, or on bigger matters of what is the character's arc in the episode, or things like that. So I feel nicely adjacent to it, but no, I do not write.
Yes.
Okay. Julie, you mentioned that there's 4 of you, right, total in your position. Do each of you have different itineraries, or do you all come together and have to cast together, or have to meet the director, or do you branch off into different,
So there are the 2 executives who work directly under me. They split the projects in half through the entire process. So each of them is only working on half the projects. And then there's one more junior executive who does everything. And I oversee everything, but probably 30% of the projects are completely delegated to those 2 that are under me. So So on most of the notes calls and things like that, you know, depending on the auspices and how likely the project is to go and whatever, then I'm the voice of it. Sometimes it's one or the other of those executives, and then we have one other junior executive. When we go to do pilots, to shoot pilots, we'll be spread out all over covering the sets, and you know, each person will have a different responsibility. But like in the casting process, let's say I go to all the casting sessions with the president of the studio, who's my boss, and then the one executive of those two who it's been their project all along. So we do kind of divide and conquer a little bit.
Well, any final words of advice, encouragement, inspiration for our students from any of you?
I'll tell you, it's a great business to be in if you can succeed in it. And you can if you try, as the song lyric goes. But without, you know, recapping everything that's said today, be realistic about your abilities, be realistic about your interests, and think about your career, because it's a good part of your life, and you should spend some time facilitating success in it.
Okay.
I would just say it was surprising to me when I started how much of succeeding, at least in my area of it, which is sort of the executive ranks and, you know, maybe more agents and things like that, where it really is about just being, you know, a good person, an enthusiastic person, someone that people would like to be around, and conveying that kind of energy, and again, being wherever you're at, coming in with a positive attitude and being excited to do that, and feel like you can learn from that. And that ultimately, even I think with writers and like we talked about getting one of these maybe assistant jobs or whatever, if everybody in these jobs works very, very hard, and you really want to be with people who are, you know, happy to be there and excited to be in the business, and it goes a long way. So I think, you know, just sort of whatever it is that you start off doing, trying to kind of suck everything out of it that you can, enjoy it, and have a positive approach with the people that you're working with.
How many of you are writers? I will quote Stephen Sondheim, because he's way smarter than me, about writing. The more personal it is, the more universal it is. Make it personal.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming, and I especially want to thank and ask you to help me thank our great panel.